Okay. Spring forward. 9 March. Weekly Marx. We're looking at chapter 12 of Karl Marx's volume 1 of Capital, 2024 edition, the two Pauls, the Princeton edition. The division of labor and the manufacturing system. The point of this chapter, of course, in following the chapter on cooperation, is the idea of thinking about how unique the capitalist division of labor is. It has certain features and characters that are not necessarily unique or perfect by any means, but there is a way in which things are organized, and it is this idea of organization that has been always important to analyzing capitalism, how it operates, how it may, in at least in the earlier conceptions of it, ask questions about alienation and estrangement. But in the later interpretation of Marx, I think we can think about it as something more than simply separating things. Um, it is separating at one level, but at another level, it is something that has greater significance in terms of wealth building or accumulating capital, which is the whole point. And the move from primitive to capitalist accumulation, I think, is possible once you start seeing the organizational differences, and that's kind of what Marx is driving at. Things that are more peculiar to capitalism that differentiate it from feudal mode of production, and noting the factors that do it. So, for example, in this chapter, he talks about, there's legal constraints on capitalist expansion of the guild system, or that guild members could not expand it beyond a certain uh, point, mainly because of, as it were, legal constraints. There were also other constraints that they're institutional constraints in the larger sense. So that's kind of what's going on here. The chapter reads better in this translation. I think you'll see. I'll read the first paragraph or two, and then I'll skip to Ed George's outline, which gives, I think, a more complete sense of it. It is a historical in that sense that Marx is providing empirical kind of support for the division of labor in the manufacturing system. So it has a double origin. The double origin of the manufacturing system, cooperation based on the division of labor, found its classic form in the manufacturing system. As the characteristic form of the capitalist production process, such cooperation predominated during the era of manufacturing proper, which lasted from about 1550 to the last third of the 18th century. The manufacturing system arose in two ways. Number one, a single capitalist assembles under his command different types of independent craftsmen in one workshop, where a product has to pass through the hands of each type of worker in order to reach the point of completion. For example, a carriage was once the product of many different craftsmen working on their own, that is, wheelwrights, harness makers, tailors, locksmiths, upholsterers, turners, fringe makers, glaziers, painters, polishers, gilders, and so on. But when carriages are made in the manufacturing workshop, these craftsmen are brought together in one building where they all work on the product at the same time. It is true that a carriage can't be gilded until it is otherwise a finished product. However, when multiple carriages are being made at the same time, some can be gilded while others are at earlier stages in the production process. At this point, we haven't yet left the realm of simple cooperation, which relies on ready-made materials in the form of people and things. But very soon, an essential change occurs. Soon all the tailor, the locksmith, and other craftsmen do is produce carriages. As they grow unaccustomed to performing the full range of operations their crafts involve, they gradually lose the skills those operations require, much like our federal government. Their newly specialized labor now takes on the form best suited for its more limited sphere of activity. When carriages were first produced in the manufacturing workshop, this appeared as the work of an assembly of various independent trades, but the work is gradually divided into the different specialized tasks of carriage production, each of which crystallizes into the exclusive function of a single worker. The totality of functions comes to be carried out by a group of specialized workers. Likewise, cloth manufacturing arose when different craftsmen were brought together under the command of a single capitalist. The same holds for a whole array of other manufacturing workshops. Number two, the second of the manufacturing system arose in two ways. But the manufacturing system of production can also take shape in the opposite way. A single mass of capital employs artisans of the same type in one workshop, where they simultaneously perform the same labor, or much the same labor, such as making paper, type, or needles. This is cooperation in its simplest form. Each craftsman, perhaps assisted by one or two apprentices, makes a finished commodity, carrying out the series of different operations that producing it entails. Each craftsman continues to work in his customary artisanal manner. Then, however, external circumstances cause a change, and the concentration of workers in the same space and the simultaneously of their labor are made use of differently. Perhaps a quantity of the commodity the workers have been producing has to be completed within a given time frame. As a result, the labor is divided up. A single craftsman no longer carries out all the necessary tasks in succession. Instead, the tasks are disconnected from one another, isolated, and carried out side by side. Each is assigned to a different craftsman, and the cooperating workers perform the different tasks at the same time. After this accidental division of labor has been employed repeatedly and has displayed its special advantages, it ossifies into a systematic division of labor. The commodity is transformed. No longer the individual product of an individual craftsman who does many different things, it is now the social product of a group of workers, and each worker continuously performs his own specialized operation. The same operations that blended into one another when a single German papermaker and guild member carried them out in succession gain a new independence. In Holland's paper manufacturing workshops becoming specialized operations performed side by multiple cooperating workers. The needlemaker belonging to a guild in Nuremberg constituted the basic element in England's needle manufacturing workshops, but whereas that one needlemaker in Nuremberg might have worked his way through 20 different operations, one after the other, in England, it didn't take long before 20 needlemakers were each carrying out just one of the 20 different operations side by side. Further experience taught the manufacturer to divide each of those 20 operations, and each newly independent operation became the separate, exclusive function of an individual worker. The manufacturing system thus originated or arose out of artisanal labor in two ways. On the one hand, it emerged where different independent occupations were concentrated in a single workshop and specialized to the point of losing their independence. Now, they merely complemented one another as narrow operation in a single commodities production process. On the other hand, the system also proceeded from the cooperation of artisans who shared the same trade. A single job was broken down into different individual operations which were isolated and made independent to the point where each became the exclusive function of a particular worker. So the manufacturing workshop introduced the division of labor into the production process, or advanced its role there, and it combined craft occupations that had been separate. But if manufacturing workshops had different starting points, their final shape was always the same: a mechanism of production whose organs were human beings. To properly understand the division of labor in the manufacturing workshop, we must keep the following points in mind. First of all, The particular stages into which the production process was divided correspond exactly to the different specialized operations into which a draft crate was being decomposed. Whether those operations were complex or simple, they were carried out using artisanal labor, which depends on the power, skill, speed, and care that the individual worker applies when he handles his tools. In other words, production was still based on artisanal labor. Given this narrow technological foundation, it had to still be possible to use specialized artisanal labor to carry out each of the specialized processes the product passed through, which means that the production process couldn't yet be divided in a truly scientific way. And precisely because craftsmanship remained the foundation of the production process, each worker was made to perform only a specialized function, with the result that his labor power became that function's lifelong organ. Finally, this division of labor is a particular kind of cooperation, but some of the advantages stem from cooperation's general nature, and thus aren't peculiar to this form of it. Now, Marx continues on, talking about the specificity of it and tries to show that it is not the processes themselves, but the organization of those processes that is very important, and proceeds to use several different kinds of artisanal examples in terms of division of production, glass making, etc., shoemakers et al. And you can see that other elements become introduced into this process for this chapter. It makes the reading of it, exciting if you're interested in this kind of interpretation of the development of the transformation of artisanal skill to a more assembly line-like process. And it's very useful for those who haven't, studied sort of Fordist production, etc., that you get a kind of assembly line, however rudimentary, in this description. Now, there are, of course, bottom notes or footnotes, and other than the translation of Marx's own footnotes, the editor's footnotes are important, as always, for each chapter, because they represent the product of the editors thinking about this as well. Chapter 12, the division of labor in the manufacturing system. The German term translated as specialized workers is Teilarbeiter, and here specialized signifies focused on one thing more than requiring advanced training and expertise. While the words Teilarbeiter and Teilarbeit, specialized labor, hardly enjoyed wide currency in Marx's day, one occurrence of the latter suggests that the term had a negative resonance in socialist circles. In an 1847 German translation of a work by Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, we read, Die Teilarbeit ist eine Sklavenbeschäftigung. Specialized labor is a slave occupation. As Keston Sutherland has pointed out, Teilarbeit consolidates the nouns in the German phrase for the division of labor, Teil der Arbeit, and in capital, Teilarbeit and Teilarbeiter are the work and workers, respectively, that go with the Teilung der Arbeit under modern capitalism, and especially with the division of labor in the modern manufacturing system. In the book, the word Teilarbeiter, Teil means part in German, also goes with Marx's phrase, the collective worker, which he uses to describe the functioning of the modern manufacturing workshop as a whole. The collective worker is the sum of the Teilarbeiter carrying out their narrow individual task, or Teilarbeit, in the workshop. These Teilarbeiter suffer, according to Marx. The conditions of their labor make it impossible for them to flourish, to develop fully as human beings. Says something about certain other people named Teil. Division of labor, remember this is editor's note 2, division of labor is an ancient topic in European political thought. Plato's myth of the metals divides citizens by the quality of their soul into ranks of actors in society. Marx and Engels argued at times that the origin of all labor divisions was sexual difference in the family. Under the capital system, Marx also claimed the social division flowed from the economic division and not the other way around. Organization of social labor then became an instrument for increasing productivity, and in this it departed radically from the supposed natural division in the family. Editor's note 3, the German word Machwerk, translated here as product, refers to something hastily thrown together for expedience sake, usually of poor quality. Marx seems to use it as a synonym for the outcome of labor, something put together through a set of processes, perhaps with some irony. Sometimes in capital, it has this sense of the work to be executed. In further notes, Marx clearly has in mind initial processes that have to occur at the beginning of a larger production process. And he quotes Hobbes from Leviathan, bellum omnium contra omnes, war of everyone against everyone. And in 8, the Roman historian Livy tells the story of Menenius Agrippa, who was asked in 494 BCE by the patrician ruling class to persuade the plebeian commoner class not to secede from the Roman Republic. Agrippa supposedly persuaded the plebes using a fable about the body. Commoners, he said, were the arms and legs that had decided by abandoning the body to starve the stomach, which represented the rulers. He also argued that this would eventually starve the arms and legs as well, since they directly connected to the stomach. And finally, 9, Richard Arkwright is known for bringing the water frame into general use in the 1760s, a device that could power a number of spinning frames at one time, thus reducing the labor required to produce yarn and increasing output. Mass production of yarn jump-started the modern factory system. So Ed George's notes, which I think are really important just because it compresses it down, even though it's done from the earlier translation, the general idea of what we're looking at here. And so I'll read that. You can go back and read the 2024 translation. The dual origin of manufacture, the manufacturing period from the middle of the 16th century to the last third of the 18th. Manufacture arises in two ways: by assembling in one place workers of different handicrafts in the production of a single product or group of products. Here, the trades assembled adopt a one-sided character through their application in the production of a single product by acquiring the character of a component part of a more general labor process. By assembling, number 2, by assembling in one place a number of the same craftspeople who do all the same type of work. Here, the division of labor asserts itself through the splitting up of the handicraft into its component operations. In both cases, the result is that previously independent trades lose their independent character and are reduced to merely supplementary and partial operations within a broader social production process. The specialized worker and his tools. Manufacture produces the skills of the specialized worker by reproducing and systematically driving to an extreme within the workshop the naturally developed differentiation which it found ready to hand in society. At the same time, the conversion of a partial task into the lifelong destiny of a man corresponds to the tendencies shown by earlier societies towards making trades hereditary. Family business, right? The incorporation of the specialized worker into the cooperative capitalist production process increases her productivity either by increasing the intensity of her labor or by decreasing the proportion of unproductive labor, or both. But at the same time, constant labor of one uniform kind disturbs the intensity and flow of a man's vital forces, which find recreation and delight in the change of activity itself. Specialization of labor, in turn, leads to a specialization of tools according to the simplification of the component parts of the production process. Manufacture thus creates at the same time one of the material conditions for the existence of machinery, which consists of a combination of simple instruments. Number 3, the two fundamental forms, Section 3, the two fundamental forms of manufacture, heterogeneous and organic. It is necessary to distinguish two distinct forms of articulation of manufacture, which arise from the nature of the article to be produced, whether it involves the final assembly of already produced partial products or arises from a series of connected products. Section 4, the division of labor in manufacture and division of labor in society. Marx begins by making a sharp distinction between what he calls the division of labor within society and the corresponding restriction of individuals to particular vocations and callings, whence the former. Within family and tribe-based communities, a division of labor based on age and sex, i.e., on a purely physical foundation, springs up naturally. The expansion of communities, conflict between communities, and the subjugation of one community by another reinforces this. The spontaneously developed differentiation between communities promotes the exchange of products and the limited exchange of commodities once and when communities come into contact with one another. Such exchange does not create the differences between spheres of production, but it does bring different spheres of production into contact with one another. The foundation of every division of labor which has attained a certain degree of development and has been brought about by the exchange of commodities is the separation of town from country. One might say that the whole economic history of society is summed up in the movement of this antithesis. A precondition for the social division of labor is a certain number of and density of population, but density here understood relatively, socially, or organically, i.e., in terms too of the level of development of means of communication, not simply in terms of simple density, that the foundation of societal division of labor is a certain level of number and density of population, but density here understood relatively, socially, or organically, in terms too of the level of development of means of communication, that the foundation of capitalist production is commodity production and exchange means that a certain division of labor must have already been reached in society. In turn, capitalist production reinforces and accelerates the development of the social division of labor. But the societal division of labor and the division of labor within the capitalist production process differ in both degree and kind. What is it that forms the connection between independent branches of society and in branches of industry in society? That the products of the one are commodities produced for the others, the exchange of commodities. What is it that characterizes the division of labor in capitalist manufacture? That the specialized worker herself does not produce finished commodities. This difference manifests itself in four different ways. Number one, while the division of labor in society is mediated by the exchange of products, the division of labor in the capitalist production process is mediated through the sale of several different labor powers to one capitalist. Number two, the division of labor in society is based on the dispersal of the means of production among independent producers. The division of labor in capitalist production is based on the concentration of the means of production in the hands of the capitalist. Number three, outside of the workshop, the equilibrium between different branches of production arises from the necessity imposed on the unregulated caprice of the producers a posteriori through the interplay of use value and exchange value. Every product must have a social need. Every product must embody the time socially necessary for its production. In this way, reasserting equilibrium if it is unbalanced. Within the workshop, equilibrium is imposed a priori through planning and regulation governed by the iron law of proportionality. Number four, the Factory division of labor implies the undisputed authority of the capitalist. The division of labor in society acknowledges no other authority than that of competition. Thus, where capitalism prevails, anarchy in the social division of labor and despotism in the manufacturing division of labor mutually condition each other. Number 5, Section 5, the capitalist character of manufacture. With the development of capitalist manufacture itself predicated on an already existing division of labor and thus required from the beginning to a minimum number of workers and hence capital, constant as much as variable, further development of the division of labor, of subdivisions, specialization, of increases in productivity, etc., pushes up proportionally the minimum amount of necessary capital, such that, as a law, the transformation of the social means of production and subsistence into capital must keep extending. While simple cooperation leaves the individual's mode of work largely unchanged, manufacture, which we can see now is necessarily capitalist manufacture, leaves nothing unchanged once it gathers momentum. The worker initially sold her labor power because she lacked the material means for producing commodities. Now, even her own labor power stands useless unless sold to capital. Capitalist manufacture converts the worker into a crippled monstrosity by furthering his particular skill, as in a forcing house, through the suppression of a whole world of productive drives and inclinations. Through the monopolization of capital of direction in the production process, all the knowledge, judgment, and will exercised by the independent peasant or handicraft worker is lost. The social productive power of the collective worker is enriched through the impoverishment of the worker, seen as individual productive power. Cooperation, which begins in a more or less spontaneous fashion, becomes the conscious, methodical, and systematic form of capitalist production. As a consequence, if, on the one hand, i.e., capitalist manufacture, appears historically as an advance and a necessary aspect of the economic process of the formation of society, on the other hand, it appears as a more refined and civilized means of exploitation. Marx now makes an interesting methodological point. Classical political economy grew up in the era of manufacturing. For this reason, it is almost exclusively preoccupied with exchange value. The writers of classical antiquity, on the other hand, view producers, production, and the division of labor almost exclusively through the lens of use value. Manufacture, although the predominant form taken by nascent capitalist production, runs into a number of obstacles which hinder its own development. Marx lists Number 1, through manufacture, creates the distinction between skilled and unskilled labor. The very lack of unskilled labor at its birth fetters its development. Number 2, it is unable to develop the exploitation of women and children, largely due to the resistance of the male workers. And number 3, although manufacture considerably cheapens the cost of apprenticeship and hence labor power, it can only do so within limits. For the skill of the individual worker cannot yet be technically eliminated from the production process. In short, the narrow technical basis on which manufacture rested, which amounts to its reliance on skilled labor, came into contradiction with the requirements of production which had itself created. So it will be for the next chapter to examine how these contradictions were resolved. So he's being very systematic. Telling us how manufacturing begins and uses a range of examples and is on the way to telling us how sort of de-skilling occurs, among other things, and a different kind, if you wanted to extend the metaphor of alienation and estrangement. I've included the study guide to capital, chapter 14, of which this is the equivalent for George, the Harry Cleaver outline of the discussion by Cleaver of Capital Volume I from his course outline, which includes, of course, manufacture, etc., all of the different elements. So you have a complete outline of these matters and a portion of the commentary, not all of the commentary. It's quite extensive and worth reading, clearly worth reading. So that's the extent of the process, and I will stop share